Picture this. You're strolling through the shadowy alleys of Rome's notorious red light district, the Subura, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of cheap perfume and whispered secrets. Suddenly a face catches your eye amid the throng of working girls, a face that's all too familiar, hidden under layers of garish rouge and tattered robes. Your heart skips a beat as realization dawns. This isn't some down-on-her-luck streetwalker. This is Valeria Messalina, the reigning Empress of Rome, consort to Emperor Claudius, throwing herself into the arms of the city's roughest characters for nothing more than the rush of it all. Not out of necessity, mind you. This was the pinnacle of Roman femininity, slipping away from her gilded cage under the cover of night to test her limits against the pros, vying to show she could go further, harder than any of them in the game of carnal stamina. Think you've got a handle on the wild excesses of ancient Rome? Buckle up, because Messalina's tale is about to eclipse even the madcap antics of emperors like Caligula. She didn't just toy with her authority, she turned her desires into a blade that carved through the heart of the empire, leading straight to her own brutal downfall. Let's rewind to the year 38 AD, when the Eternal City buzzed with excitement over what looked like the ultimate power couple tying the knot. At just 15, Messalina stepped into the spotlight as Claudius's bride in a lavish affair that screamed Roman ideals, lineage, legacy, and the promise of strong heirs to keep the divine blood flowing. She was the epitome of what the empire craved in its leading lady, youthful, radiant, hailing from one of those venerable old families that trace their roots back to the gods themselves. Claudius, pushing 28 and battling what we'd now call cerebral palsy, with his awkward gait and speech impediments, must have felt like he'd hit the jackpot. Sources from the era paint her as the classic beauty, fair complexion glowing like polished marble, locks of sun-kissed gold, and those sharp, elegant lines that screamed high-born grace. On the surface, she nailed her role, popping out a couple of kids for Claudius and gliding through official events with the poise of a goddess incarnate. But let's not kid ourselves. Roman culture was a minefield of expectations for women, stacking them into neat boxes. At the top sat the paragons of virtue, devoted spouses, and nurturing moms who embodied the Republic's moral backbone. Down in the gutters lurked the performers and pleasure providers, seen as the dregs of society. For an empress, the bar was sky-high. She had to radiate purity so intensely that even a whiff of scandal could topple thrones and trigger chaos. That's what made Messalina's double life not just juicy gossip, but a ticking bomb under the seat of power. The gap between her polished public persona and her shadowy urges, it wasn't merely risky, it threatened to unravel the whole imperial tapestry. Yet, within the opulent confines of the Palatine Hill, a storm was brewing that no one saw coming. The same girl who beamed serenely at temple rites and orchestrated elegant soirees was hatching plans for escapades that would leave even the most worldly senators slack-jawed. It kicked off innocently enough in her debut year as Empress. Staff around the palace picked up on odd quirks. She'd shoo away her protectors at weird times, pleading exhaustion, only to slip out later in plain garb that masked her status. At first, these late-night jaunts felt like a teenager's bid for freedom, a break from the stifling rituals and watchful eyes of court life. How quickly things spiraled, though. What began as a curious peek into the underbelly of Rome morphed into a deliberate plunge. Messalina didn't just wander. She studied the world of the city's courtesans like a general mapping enemy lines. Their habits, their haunts, their tricks of the trade. This was no whim. It was strategic reconnaissance, laying the groundwork for her own twisted campaign. The spark that ignited it all, the Saturnalia festivities in 40 AD, that wild holiday where societal norms flipped upside down and inhibitions melted away. While Claudius dutifully tended to sacred duties, Messalina donned a disguise as an everyday Roman and dove headfirst into the Subura's chaos. Curiosity about the common folk's revelry soon twisted into a fixation. She had to prove she could dominate in their arena, outshining the experts at their own game. Word from insiders, as chronicled by historians like Tacitus, leaked out in hushed tones. She'd approached a brothel owner, posing as a thrill-seeking noblewoman eager for a one-off stint. The boss, clueless to her real rank, shrugged and let her in. But that evening, Messalina unleashed a performance that blew the roof off. She handled a parade of patrons with an intensity that stunned the veterans, who were no strangers to marathon sessions. As the first light crept in and her colleagues called it quits, Messalina dug in her heels, craving more action, more proof of her unmatched prowess. The proprietor had to practically drag her out. But in that moment, a monster awakened. She'd tasted victory in the vilest of venues, and it hooked her deeper than any opiate. From that fateful night, Messalina's secret world ballooned into a well-oiled machine, showcasing a cunning intellect that belied her youthful facade. She wove a web of loyal aides to ferry her beyond the palace walls, crafted personas with flawless disguises, and navigated the city's seedy undercurrents like a shadow in the mist. Mere street-level dalliances, they lost their luster fast. Her drive for dominance pushed her toward bolder frontiers, pitting herself against the crème de la crème of Rome's pleasure trade in high-stakes showdowns. These weren't hushed trysts. They drew crowds of affluent spectators, turning degradation into spectacle. Bets flew, tensions soared, as the elite huddled to witness their sovereign Lady V like a prizefighter in bouts of raw endurance. The pinnacle of infamy hit in 41 AD when Messalina threw down the gauntlet to Sylla, the undisputed queen of Rome's courtesans. The setup was brutally simple. From dusk till dawn, who'd claim the most conquests? Winner takes a king's ransom in glittering orrery. The venue buzzed with nobility, their wagers stacking up as they ogled the empress reduced to a contender in this fleshly colosseum. Sylla, seasoned and shrewd, played it smart, metering her energy, deploying time-tested strategies to keep the momentum without burning out. By sunrise, she'd tallied 25 suitors, collapsing in triumph, convinced she'd clinched it. Oh, but Messalina, she was in her element, revving up when others flagged. Even with Sylla tapping out, the Empress pressed on, drawing in fresh challengers with an insatiable fire that transcended lust. It was conquest, pure and primal. Records whisper she topped 30 that night, halting only when the well ran dry. No cheers erupted, just a stunned hush fell over the onlookers, grappling with the abyss they'd glimpsed. This was no victim of circumstance. Here stood the world's mightiest woman, electing abasement for the sheer exhilaration. Dig deeper, and the mind reels. Messalina thrived on the chasm between her throne-room majesty and gutter-level surrender. The wider the divide, the fiercer the high. Her status didn't hinder, it amplified every thrill, turning shame into her ultimate aphrodisiac. Yet these arena-like clashes were mere preludes to a darker symphony, one that would entangle the empire's pillars in her web of vice. But hold on, if these raw competitions have your pulse racing, brace yourself for the empire-shaking empire she built next, where pleasure became politics, and no one was safe from her grasp. Messalina's nocturnal escapades had already pushed the boundaries of scandal. But by 42 AD, she wasn't just playing games in the shadows. She was constructing a full-blown empire of vice that would shake Rome to its core. Imagine a luxurious villa nestled near the Campus Martius, its elegant facade masking a den of calculated debauchery. This wasn't your average brothel. It was a high-stakes operation cloaked as an exclusive social club, where the city's most powerful men were ensnared in a web of pleasure and blackmail. And at its heart, the Empress herself, orchestrating it all with the precision of a master strategist. Using her imperial clout, Messalina didn't just invite noblewomen to join her venture, she strong-armed them. With a smile that could chill blood, she leveraged threats of political ruin or financial devastation to pull aristocratic ladies into her fold. What looked like willing participation was anything but. These women were pawns in a game backed by the throne's full might. But Messalina's genius wasn't in the coercion. It was in her choice of targets. She didn't waste her time on riffraff. Her clients were the elite, senators plotting in the curia, generals commanding legions, merchants swimming in wealth. Every tryst was a trap. every whispered pillow talk a goldmine of secrets. Hidden in the villa's shadows, her trusted servants played spy, scribbling down every careless word, every compromising act. Messalina wasn't just running a pleasure house, she was building an intelligence network that made her one of the most dangerous players in Rome. Which senator was scheming against Claudius's policies? Which commander harbored mutinous thoughts? Which trader was dodging taxes or smuggling goods? She knew it all, her ledger of secrets growing thicker by the night. This wasn't about satisfying base desires, it was about power, raw and unfiltered, wrapped in the guise of seduction. Her methods were as ruthless as they were clever. She'd spot her marks at state banquets, reading their glances and gestures like a hunter stalking prey. Invitations to her private gatherings followed, luring them into the villa's opulent halls. The evenings started innocently enough, wine, music, polite chatter, before spiraling into exotic entertainments that left guests too entangled to back out. The reveal was the kicker. Only after they'd crossed lines did they learn they'd been with the Empress herself or the wives of their allies. The shame was a shackle, binding them to her will. Speak out, and their own disgrace would bury them. This wasn't just personal ruin, it was a systematic assault on Rome's social fabric. Messalina turned sacred bonds, marriage, family, loyalty, into weapons of control. Foreign diplomats started noticing oddities, policies shifting to favor obscure figures, military posts handed to nobodies with Messalina's mysterious backing, trade deals tilting toward merchants with no clear ties to the state. The empire's machinery was being rewired, not by law or debate, but by the machinations of a woman who'd turned desire into dominion. Yet even this audacious scheme wasn't enough for her. The thrill of secrecy began to fade, and Messalina craved something bolder, something that would flaunt her power in the open, daring the world to blink. By 44 AD, she stepped out of the shadows, orchestrating public spectacles that masqueraded as religious festivals, but served as stages for her dominance. These weren't mere parties, they were theater, with Rome's elite as unwilling actors in her play of degradation. Messalina's so-called festivals were masterpieces of manipulation, dressed up as divine worship to dodge scrutiny. She'd summon senators, their families, and Rome's top brass, claiming they were honoring gods like Bacchus or Venus. The events kicked off with all the pomp of sacred rites, offerings, chants, the works, before sliding into something far darker. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she'd weave in rituals she claimed were ancient traditions, each step pulling her guests deeper into a mire of moral decay. By the time they realized they'd been duped, they were neck-deep in acts that would ruin them if exposed. Her genius lay in the psychology of shame. Forcing Rome's proudest to debase themselves in front of their peers, forged a twisted bond. Nobody could call her out without admitting their own role in the depravity. She'd watch, sometimes joining in, sometimes narrating with a cruel smirk, turning senators who dared oppose her into spectacles of humiliation. Their power crumbled as they stood, stripped of dignity, before colleagues they'd once commanded. Execution might have been kinder. This was annihilation by embarrassment. Then came the unthinkable. Messalina began pulling in the young, sons and daughters of noble families, barely into their teens. She spun it as religious necessity, exploiting their obedience to imperial authority. Parents were trapped. Protecting their children meant confessing their own complicity. The ripple effects were chilling. Diplomats from rival nations noted Rome's leaders growing jittery, their confidence replaced by a haunted deference. Generals faltered in negotiations, senators shrank from bold moves. Messalina had broken the empire's spine, not with swords, but with secrets. Her final act, though, was a leap into madness even Rome couldn't stomach. In 48 AD, with Claudius away inspecting grain routes in Ostia, Messalina staged a jaw-dropping stunt, a full-blown wedding to Gaius Silius, a dashing young senator she'd been obsessing over. This wasn't a fling or a mock ceremony. It was a legal marriage, complete with priests' vows and signed contracts, all while she remained Claudius's wife. She'd effectively declared herself divorced and re-wed, spitting in the face of imperial law and tradition. The celebration erupted into a days-long orgy, dragging in what was left of Rome's untainted elite. Messalina, lost in her delusion, began calling Silius emperor and issuing orders in his name, even plotting a coronation to cement their rule. Silius, initially dazzled, soon realized he was a puppet in her deranged vision of a new Rome, molded by her whims. Escape was impossible. He was too deep in her trap. Word of the betrayal reached Claudius through loyal freedmen who risked everything to sound the alarm. At first he couldn't believe it. Bigamy from his empress? Unfathomable. But as proof piled up, witnesses, documents, the marriage contract itself, he saw the truth. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a coup. Claudius stormed back to Rome with his Praetorian Guard and cornered Messalina in the gardens of her illicit wedding feast. Her final moments were a clash of defiance and dread as the reality of her shattered empire sank in. No amount of blackmail could save her now. Her end was swift and merciless. Claudius ordered her execution, her name erased from monuments, her statues smashed, her legacy branded with damnatio memoriae, a decree that made speaking of her treason. The empress who'd wielded desire as a weapon was obliterated by the empire's ultimate power, enforced oblivion. Her fall didn't just end a scandal, it closed a chapter where one woman's obsessions nearly toppled an empire. If Messalina's saga has you reeling, hungry for more hidden truths from history's darkest corners, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment with where you're watching from. Let's keep peeling back the layers of the past's wildest stories together.